After we finish, give her the envelope. Make sure he never sees it.
Doctor, are you sure about this?
The device activates in 7 minutes. She paid for a clean ending.
The vasectomy was supposed to be the easy part. Just a quick snip, 30 minutes under local anesthetic, and then I could go home to my loving wife Julia with a bag of frozen peas and a clear conscience about our child-free future. What I didn't expect was to wake up during the procedure and overhear my surgeon whispering about envelopes and implants. "Tom, you're going to feel a little pressure," Dr. Marcus Elroy said, his voice clinical and detached. I'd chosen him because Julia recommended him. Said he was the best urologist in Portland, Maine. Now, lying on that cold steel table with my legs spread and my dignity somewhere on the floor with my pants, I was starting to question that recommendation. The anesthetic was supposed to knock me out completely, but something went wrong. I could hear everything, feel the tugging and cutting, but I couldn't move or speak. It was like being trapped in my own body, which, as it turned out, was exactly what was happening. "Hand me that envelope for Mrs. Harlan," Dr. Elroy murmured to his nurse, Carla. "Make sure she gets it before he wakes up fully." My blood turned to ice water. What envelope? What did Julia need that I couldn't know about? "The implantation went smoothly," Elroy continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Monitor him for 3 days, then we'll know if the device is functioning properly." Device? What device? This was supposed to be a vasectomy, not some kind of medical experiment. I tried to scream, tried to move, but my body remained paralyzed while my mind raced with terrifying possibilities. 20 minutes later, I was in recovery, pretending to be groggy while watching Julia through half-closed eyes. She stood by the window, clutching a manila envelope against her chest like it contained state secrets. Her usually perfect blonde hair was disheveled, and her hands shook as she read whatever was inside. "How are you feeling, honey?" she asked when she noticed my eyes were open, quickly shoving the envelope into her oversized purse. "Like I got kicked by a horse," I mumbled, playing up the post-anesthetic confusion. "What's in the envelope?" Her face went white. "What envelope? You're still loopy from the pills, Tom. Let's get you home." But I wasn't loopy. I was wide awake and scared as hell. Something was seriously wrong, and my wife of 8 years was in on it. During the car ride home, I pretended to doze while Julia made hushed phone calls. "It's done," she whispered into her phone. 3 days. Just like you said. "Yes, I understand the risks." Risks? What risks? My surgical site throbbed with a pain that felt different from what I'd expected. Deeper, more foreign. Like something that didn't belong was now living under my skin. That night, while Julia thought I was sleeping off the anesthetic, I snuck into the bathroom and examined the incision. The stitches were neat and professional, but there was a hard lump beneath the skin that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. When I pressed on it, a sharp pain shot through my groin and up into my abdomen. I'd walked into that clinic a trusting husband and walked out a marked man. One thing was certain, I wasn't the only one with something under my skin. The next morning, I called in sick to my job at the advertising agency and drove 2 hours to Eastern Maine Medical Center in Bangor. I told the emergency room doctor that I was having complications from surgery, but I didn't mention my suspicions about the implant. Not yet. "Mr. Harlan, I need to ask you some questions about your procedure," Dr. Sarah Kim said after examining the x-rays. Her face was grim, professional concern etched in every line. "This object in your abdomen, it's not surgical debris. It was deliberately placed." My worst fears were confirmed. "What kind of object?" "It appears to be some sort of tracking or monitoring device, very sophisticated, probably military grade. I've never seen anything like it in a civilian medical setting." She paused, studying my face. "Mr. Harlan, did you consent to any experimental procedures?" "Hell no," I said, anger finally overriding the fear. "I went in for a simple vasectomy. My wife recommended the surgeon." Dr. Kim's expression darkened. "I'm going to remove this immediately, and then I think you need to contact the police. What was done to you was completely illegal." The removal surgery took 40 minutes. When I woke up, Dr. Kim showed me the device, a small cylindrical object about the size of a pill capsule, with tiny wires and what looked like a GPS chip. "This could track your location, monitor your vital signs, even deliver pills into your system," she explained. "Someone wanted to keep very close tabs on you, Mr. Harlan. The question is why." I knew why, even if I didn't want to admit it. Julia had been acting strange for months. Secretive phone calls, unexplained absences, a sudden interest in our life insurance policies. I'd chalked it up to work stress, but now I realized she'd been planning something much more sinister. Instead of going home, I drove to a cheap motel outside Bangor and paid cash for a room. Then I looked up private investigators in the yellow pages. Old school, but I figured if Julia was tracking me electronically, analog methods might be safer. Gus Drayton's office was above a pawn shop on Union Street, accessible through a narrow staircase that smelled like cigarettes and desperation. Gus himself looked like he'd stepped out of a 1940s detective novel, grizzled, overweight, with suspicious eyes and a bourbon habit that started before noon. "Let me get this straight," Gus said after I'd told him the whole story. "Your wife recommended a surgeon who implanted a tracking device during your vasectomy, and now you think she's trying to eliminate you for the insurance money?" "I know how it sounds," I said, placing the removed device on his desk. "But there's the proof." Gus picked up the device, turning it over in his thick fingers. His skeptical expression slowly changed to one of professional interest. "This is some serious hardware. Military contractors, maybe CIA. Your wife doesn't work for the government, does she? She's in pharmaceutical sales, makes good money, travels a lot." As I said it, I realized how little I actually knew about Julia's work. She was always vague about her clients, her meetings, her business trips that sometimes lasted weeks. "I'll need 3 days and $1,000, Gus said. "Cash only. If your wife is running a con this sophisticated, we need to assume she's monitoring your credit cards and bank accounts." I paid him with the emergency cash I kept hidden in my car's spare tire compartment, money Julia didn't know about. Trust is what they cut out of me, but I was done bleeding for Julia. 2 days later, Gus called with news that shattered what remained of my world. "Your wife isn't who she says she is," he said without preamble. "Julia Marie Harlan doesn't exist. The woman you married has been using a false identity for at least 10 years. Her real name is Jessica Crowley, and she's wanted in 3 states for insurance fraud." The room spun around me. "That's impossible. I've seen her driver's license, her passport. All fake and expensive fakes at that. Professional-level forgeries. But here's the kicker. She's been meeting with Dr. Elroy regularly for the past 6 months. Not at his office, at a house in Cape Elizabeth. A house where she's been living with him and 2 kids. My marriage, my entire life, had been a lie. Julia wasn't just cheating on me. She was living a completely separate existence with another family while using me as some kind of mark in an elaborate long-term con. "There's more," Gus continued. "I did some digging into your background. Your father's end 5 years ago, the one ruled accidental? I think you need to take another look at that life insurance payout." The phone slipped from my numb fingers. My father had died in a car accident just 6 months after Julia and I got married. She'd been so supportive during my grief, so helpful with the insurance paperwork. The payout had been substantial, enough to pay off our mortgage and set us up financially. Now I understood. Julia hadn't just been planning to eliminate me for the insurance money. She'd already eliminated my father. I drove home in a rage that burned hotter than the main sun in August. Julia's car was in the driveway, which meant she was probably inside, playing the concerned wife, wondering where her recovering husband had disappeared to for 2 days. The house looked different now that I knew the truth. The expensive furniture, the artwork, the renovations we'd done last year, all paid for with blood money from my father's end. Julia had been spending my inheritance while planning my homicide. I found her in the kitchen, making what looked like a get-well dinner. She was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one that made her eyes look like sapphires. Now those eyes looked cold and calculating. "Tom, thank God you're home. I was so worried when you didn't come back last night. How are you feeling?" Her concern seemed genuine, but I now knew she was a professional liar. "Much better," I said, forcing a smile. "The pain is almost gone. Dr. Elroy did excellent work. I'm so glad I recommended him. He's supposed to be the best." She turned back to the stove, but I caught the slight tremor in her hands. While she cooked, I went upstairs and searched our bedroom. In the back of her closet, behind winter coats she never wore, I found a small fireproof safe I'd never seen before. The combination was our wedding date, another cruel joke. Inside were 3 passports with Julia's picture but different names, $10,000 in cash, and a folder labeled Thomas Harlan, Life Insurance. The folder contained copies of all my insurance policies, medical records, and a handwritten timeline that made my blood freeze. It detailed my father's accident, our marriage, and a plan for my accidental end that was supposed to happen within the next month. The tracking device had been a test run, a way to monitor my movements and vital signs to determine the perfect time and method for homicide. At the bottom of the folder was a photograph that destroyed what little remained of my heart. Julia, Dr. Elroy, and 2 young children at what looked like a family barbecue. Julia was wearing a wedding ring I'd never seen, and the kids were calling her Mom. I photographed everything with my phone, then carefully replaced the items exactly as I'd found them. Julia couldn't know I'd discovered her secret, not yet. I needed more evidence, and I needed a plan for revenge that would destroy her as completely as she'd destroyed me. That evening, I played the role of recovering patient while Julia played concerned wife. We watched television together, her head on my shoulder, her fingers tracing gentle circles on my chest, the same fingers that had signed my end warrant. "I love you so much, Tom," she whispered during a commercial break. "I don't know what I'd do if anything happened to you." "Nothing's going to happen to me," I replied, meaning it in a way she couldn't possibly understand. "I'm going to be around for a very long time." The next day, while Julia was at work, I drove to Sherry's Tavern, a dive bar where Julia's supposed best friend Sherry worked as a bartender. Sherry had always rubbed me the wrong way. Too friendly, too interested in our personal business, too quick with advice about marriage and money. Now I understood why. She was part of the con. "Tom, how are you feeling, honey? Julia said you had surgery." Sherry's smile was as fake as Julia's concern, but she didn't know I could see through the performance now. "Much better. Actually, I wanted to ask you about something. Julia's been acting strange lately, and I'm worried about her. All those late meetings, the phone calls she won't talk about. Is there something I should know?" Sherry's eyes darted away from mine. "I don't know what you mean. Julia's just working hard, you know? Big promotion coming up." "What promotion? She hasn't mentioned any promotion to me." "Oh well, maybe I misunderstood. You know how women talk." She was sweating now, despite the bar's air conditioning. I leaned closer, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between you and me, Sherry, I think Julia might be seeing someone else. I found some things that don't add up. If you know something, please tell me. I need to know the truth." That's when Sherry made her fatal mistake. Instead of denying it or acting shocked, she looked relieved. "Oh, Tom, I'm so glad you finally figured it out. Julia's been waiting for the big payday for months now. She said once everything was settled, she could finally be with Marcus openly." The words hung in the air between us like a capital punishment. Sherry's face went white as she realized what she'd just admitted. I didn't mean, Tom, I'm sorry, I thought you knew." But I was already walking away, my phone recording everything. Turns out you can get more than wings at Sherry's. You can get the truth if you know how to order it. That night, I followed Julia to Cape Elizabeth. The house was a sprawling colonial in an expensive neighborhood, the kind of place that screamed old money and respectability. Through the large front windows, I could see the perfect family scene. Julia helping children with homework while Dr. Elroy read a newspaper in his leather chair. It was the life she'd built with my father's blood money while planning my end. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching them through those windows, memorizing every detail. The way she ruffled the little boy's hair, the kiss she gave Elroy when he brought her coffee, the wedding photos on the mantelpiece that I could just make out from the street. My wife, my murderous, lying wife, had another family, another life, another husband who probably had no idea that his perfect wife was a butcher. Unless he was in on it too. The next morning, I called Gus and told him what I'd discovered. He whistled low when I described the contents of Julia's safe and Sherry's confession. "This is bigger than I thought, Tom. We're not just talking about insurance fraud anymore. If they eliminated your father and were planning to eliminate you, this is a homicide conspiracy. But we need more evidence before we go to the police. Right now, it's your word against theirs, and they've got a lot more to lose." "What do you suggest?" "Surveillance. We document everything, their meetings, their conversations, their plans. We build a case so solid that even the best lawyer can't poke holes in it." For the next week, Gus and I became shadows. We followed Julia to her meetings with Elroy, photographed them together, recorded their conversations when possible. We tracked their financial records, their travel patterns, their communications. What we discovered was a sophisticated operation that had been running for years. Julia and Elroy weren't just husband and wife. They were partners in a homicide-for-hire scheme that targeted wealthy men with substantial life insurance policies. They would research potential sufferers, Julia would seduce and marry them, and then they would arrange accidents that looked natural but were actually carefully planned homicides. I was sufferer number 4. The tracking device had been their latest innovation, a way to monitor their targets and time the homicides perfectly. "The good news is we've got enough evidence to put them away for life," Gus said as we reviewed our findings. The bad news is they're planning to move fast. According to their communications, your accident is scheduled for this weekend. My blood ran cold. What kind of accident? Car crash on Route 95. They've been monitoring your driving patterns, and they know you always take that route when you visit your mother in Boston. Elroy has medical contacts who will perform the autopsy and rule it accidental passing due to surgical complications. Even in end, they plan to make it look like the vasectomy had somehow caused my car accident. It was diabolical in its simplicity. We have to stop them, I said. We will. But first, we're going to make them pay. That night, while Julia was at her book club, actually a planning session with Elroy and Sherry, I broke into Elroy's garage. His precious BMW and Julia's Mercedes were parked side by side like matching symbols of their blood money wealth. I slashed all 4 tires on both cars, then used my keys to carve Butcher into the BMW's paint and Liar into the Mercedes. For good measure, I left a note under the windshield wipers. I know what you did to my father. I know what you plan to do to me. The game is over. The garage alarm went off as I was finishing, and I heard footsteps running from the house. Elroy appeared in the doorway wearing a bathrobe and slippers, his face twisted with rage. "You son of a witch!" he screamed, chasing me into the night. I ran through the expensive neighborhood with Elroy behind me, both of us probably looking like lunatics to anyone watching from their windows. Nothing like a little cardio during your criminal enterprise, I thought as I sprinted toward my car. I made it to safety, but I knew the chase was just beginning. Julia and Elroy would realize their cover was blown and desperate people do desperate things. I was right. The next morning, I found a threatening letter slipped under my door. "Back off, or you'll join your father sooner than planned. We know where you are every minute of every day. There's nowhere you can hide." But they were wrong about that. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was hunting. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Julia returned home that afternoon with homicide in her eyes and desperation in her voice. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Tom?" she screamed, dropping all pretense of being the loving wife. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" "I'm messing with a couple of butchers who eliminated my father and planned to homicide me," I replied calmly. "But I guess the jig is up now, isn't it, Jessica?" Her face went white when I used her real name. "How did you find out?" It wasn't hard once I started looking. Amazing what you can discover about someone when you actually pay attention. Like the fact that you've been married to Dr. Elroy for 12 years, or that you've eliminated at least 3 other men for their insurance money. Julia's mask finally slipped completely. The woman I'd thought I married disappeared, replaced by a cold-eyed hunter who looked at me like I was already dead. "You should have just died quietly like you were supposed to," she said. "Now things are going to get messy. For you, maybe. I've already given copies of all the evidence to 3 different people. If anything happens to me, the police will know exactly where to look." It was a bluff, but Julia didn't know that. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. "Marcus, we have a problem. He knows everything. Yes, everything. What do you want me to do?" I couldn't hear Elroy's response, but Julia's face grew even paler. "Are you sure? Okay, I understand." She hung up and looked at me with something that might have been regret. "I'm sorry it has to end this way, Tom. I actually did like you, at least at first. You were kind, generous, trusting. Everything Marcus isn't, but not rich enough to keep alive, apparently. It's not personal. It's just business. Homicide is always personal to the sufferer." Julia reached into her purse, and for a moment I thought she was going for a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. "Insulin," she said, holding it up to the light. "Completely undetectable in an autopsy if administered correctly. You'll go into diabetic shock and die of natural causes. Very peaceful, very clean. Except I'm not diabetic. You are now. The tracking device we implanted was actually a slow-release insulin pump. We've been conditioning your body for weeks. One injection of this and your blood sugar will crash so fast that even emergency intervention won't save you." The room spun around me as I realized how completely they planned my homicide. The device hadn't just been tracking me. It had been slowly poisoning me, preparing my body for the final dose that would eliminate me. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd removed their advantage when Dr. Kim took out the device in Bangor. "There's just one problem with your plan, Julia. The device is gone. I had it surgically removed 3 days ago." For the first time since I'd known her, Julia looked genuinely shocked. "That's impossible. The device was designed to be undetectable. Not to a doctor who knew what to look for. It's sitting in an evidence locker right now, along with all the documentation about how it was illegally implanted in my body. Julia's hand shook as she held the vial of insulin. It doesn't matter. This will still eliminate you, device or no device. Maybe, but you'll go down for homicide, and so will your real husband. Is that really worth it? For a moment, I thought she might back down. Then her face hardened with resolve. Yes, she said, advancing toward me with the syringe. It is. That's when Gus kicked in the front door. Police, drop the weapon. Julia spun around, startled, and I used the distraction to tackle her. The syringe went flying, shattering against the wall and spilling its deadly contents across the hardwood floor. It's over, Julia, I said, pinning her arms behind her back. Or should I call you Jessica? She struggled beneath me, still trying to reach the broken syringe. You don't understand. Marcus will eliminate me if I don't finish this. He'll eliminate both of us. Then I guess you should have chosen a better partner. The police arrived 10 minutes later, along with FBI agents who had been investigating the insurance fraud ring. Apparently, Gus had contacts in federal law enforcement, and they'd been building a case against Julia and Elroy for months. Julia was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit homicide, insurance fraud, and identity theft. Elroy was picked up at his office an hour later. Sherry, faced with federal charges, immediately flipped and provided testimony against her co-conspirators. But I wasn't satisfied with just seeing them arrested. I wanted them to lose everything, the way they'd taken everything from me and my father. That's when I remembered the children I'd seen in Cape Elizabeth. Elroy's children who had no idea their father was a butcher and their stepmother was a fraud. I made one final phone call. The call was to Child Protective Services. I need to report 2 children living in a home where the adults have been arrested for homicide, I told the caseworker. The children are currently unsupervised, and I'm concerned for their welfare. Within hours, Elroy's children were removed from the Cape Elizabeth house and placed in protective custody. The house itself was seized as evidence in the homicide conspiracy, along with all the assets Julia and Elroy had accumulated through their crimes. But I wasn't done yet. I drove to Elroy's medical practice and walked into the waiting room, where a dozen patients sat reading magazines and waiting for appointments that would never happen. Excuse me, I announced to the room. I thought you should all know that Dr. Elroy was arrested this morning for homicide and insurance fraud. You might want to find a new doctor. The receptionist tried to stop me, but the damage was done. By evening, the story was on every local news channel. Dr. Marcus Elroy, respected urologist and pillar of the community, was actually a cold-blooded butcher who had been eliminating patients for money. His medical license was revoked immediately. His practice collapsed overnight. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. Julia's pharmaceutical company fired her the moment her real identity was revealed. Her fake credentials meant she'd never actually been qualified for the job, and the company faced potential lawsuits from every client she'd ever contacted. But the sweetest revenge came from an unexpected source: Elroy's first wife. Margaret Elroy had died 3 years earlier in what was ruled a tragic accident. She'd fallen down the stairs in their home, breaking her neck. The life insurance payout had funded Elroy's new practice and his new life with Julia. But Margaret's sister had never believed the accident story. When she saw Elroy's arrest on the news, she contacted the police and demanded they reopen Margaret's case. The exhumation revealed traces of the same insulin compound that Julia had tried to use on me. Margaret Elroy hadn't fallen down the stairs. She'd been eliminated by her husband and his lover, just like my father had been eliminated, just like I was supposed to be ended. The additional homicide charge meant that both Julia and Elroy would face the death penalty. 3 months later, I sat in the courtroom and watched as the judge read their sentences. Life in prison without the possibility of parole for Julia. Passing by lethal injection for Elroy, who had actually administered the fatal doses to his sufferers. Julia looked across the courtroom at me as they led her away in shackles. Her beautiful face was haggard now, aged by months in jail and the weight of her crimes. She mouthed something that might have been, "I'm sorry," or might have been, "I hate you." I didn't care which. Elroy didn't look at anyone. He stared straight ahead as they walked him to Passing Row, his medical career and his life of luxury replaced by a concrete cell and the certainty of execution. Sherry got 15 years for her role in the conspiracy. She'd be eligible for parole in 7 years, but her life as she'd known it was over. After the sentencing, I drove to my father's grave for the first time since his funeral. The headstone read, "Beloved father and friend," but now I knew he'd also been a homicide sufferer. "I got them, Dad," I said, placing fresh flowers on his grave. "They'll never hurt anyone else." The insurance companies paid out settlements to all the sufferers' families, including a substantial amount to me for the attempted homicide and illegal medical procedures. I donated most of it to organizations that help crime sufferers, keeping just enough to rebuild my life. I moved away from Maine, away from the house where Julia had planned my end, away from the memories of a marriage that had been built on lies and homicide. I started over in a small town in Vermont, where nobody knew my story and I could begin again. Sometimes, late at night, I still felt phantom pain from where the tracking device had been implanted. The scar was barely visible now, but the memory of that violation, that betrayal, would never fully heal. But I was alive, and my father's butchers were behind bars. Justice had been served, even if it had taken longer than it should have. Surgery's over. I'm whole again, and they'll never cut me down to size. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Julia in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Tom," it read, "I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that my feelings for you weren't entirely fake. There were moments when I forgot why I was there, when I actually cared about you as a person. That probably doesn't matter now, but I needed to tell you. I'm sorry for what we did to your father. I'm sorry for what we tried to do to you. I hope someday you can find peace. Julia." I burned the letter without finishing it. Some apologies come too late, and some wounds are too deep for forgiveness. Julia and Elroy had taken 8 years of my life, eliminated my father, and tried to eliminate me for money. They'd destroyed families, betrayed trust, and left a trail of sufferers in their wake. Now they would spend the rest of their lives paying for those crimes, and I would spend the rest of mine making sure their sufferers were remembered. That seemed like justice to me.